here's my idea. So I have 2 children, and they're young. But I want to create something that is like more personalized for them, so that we do play like Dungeon World. I have a son; he's 3. We play. He understands the storytelling elements of it. But I want to, like, as he starts to become older and we start gaming as a family, I want to have something that is like kind of more personalized with him. So if like after this gets produced, it has like the character, like the characters have their names, like it's like elements about his story. Like he always has these recurring characters, even though he's 3, like he understands the process. So this is kind of like a very loosely based what I have for an idea. And this is all like based off of his storytelling. I want the story to be about 2 kids, they're brothers. Okay. And their names are Atlas and Cassio. Okay. Those are my sons. The idea is they're in this world and they have a floating book with them. And this floating book, pages are missing. So this floating book is like magic. The pages that are missing are all crumpled up, but the crumpled pages have like a shape. And it's a spell book, right? So each one of these pages, it's almost like a Pokemon. Like they want to go and collect these pages to complete this book. Each one of the crumpled piece of paper is like resembles, like some sort of anthropomorphic animal type shape. And when they collect it, then they have the whim of this page that they can use however they want to. But I wanted the crux of the storyline to be the 2 of them, like just getting these pages and then returning it to this like really big arcane library. And so that's like the main idea.
Yeah. And that being the scope of the adventure. So I really like the idea of adventures when they're actually quite concise. When it's like, okay, we're going to spend, well, you don't have to put a pin on how many sessions even, but you say, okay, we're going to spend X sessions, finite amount of sessions playing to see what happens on the way to returning the book to the arcane library. Right? Like I really like that idea. That sounds like really, really fun idea. Yeah. Cool. I like all those aspects. And another thing, I didn't actually, it didn't occur to me to do this, but in the playtesting for my own system stuff, I actually got a really nice bit of advice from Jay Walton, from Jonathan, just the other week, which is that if you're playtesting your own stuff, it's really, really good to just ignore like the fighter, the rogue, stuff like that. Like make them write some characters specifically for your players. Just be egotistical about it.
Yeah,
that's how Apocalypse World started. Apparently, I didn't even know that.
Oh, wow.
Like the first one he wrote was the Brainer for one of his playtesters, and then he wrote like the Hard Holder for what's her name? Was it Melanie? No, what is it? I've forgotten her name.
Is it for his wife? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Meredith.
Cool.
I can't remember. Anyway, so he wrote the character, like the first characters he wrote for those were specifically for his playtesters. It was a real ego boost for everyone involved, and that worked out pretty well, didn't it?
Yeah, cool. And it kind of reminds me of like Lady Blackbird. Like when you play, you have those characters, right? So you don't even. It's like who wants to be like the captain guy? Who wants to be? Yeah. So that sounds pretty cool. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's kind of like the general idea. And then other than that, if we're able to like incorporate some of like my son has reoccurring bad guys. He created a group of bad guys called the Venomen, which are like men who are, well, it's Venom men. So it's like kind of like weird, snaky, spidery guys. And so, I mean, I guess tone wise, I don't know if have you ever played the game No Thank You Evil?
No, that rings a bell though.
So Monty Cook, the dude who did Numenera, came out with like a children's. It's like a children's family game, but it's role playing. But it definitely has that kind of like childish feel to it. I don't know if I want it to be like Candyland, but I want it to at least be like I don't know, maybe more light, or it's definitely not going to be like exploring like really dark themes.
Yeah, we're on the Saturday morning cartoon end of the scale, right? Rather than like, the after dark weird anime end of the scale.
Right. Yeah, there's not a bunch of like tentacles coming out doing it. But I was thinking more like, yes, like kind of like maybe like a little bit more heavy than like Pokemon, but like Pokemon or like 80s style cartoon.
I mean,
or
that's
whatever.
the funny thing, isn't it? Like you'll get some, I mean, I don't know, you're probably about the same age as me, but like some of those 80s cartoons, God knows they were big enough inspiration on me as well and continue to be. So like the idea of 80s cartoons, you can start with something quite light, both mechanically and light-hearted. And that can go quite deep. You can go quite a ways with that. Think about like the old Batman cartoon from when, like, I'm 32. Are you about the same?
Yeah,
like the old Batman cartoon.
I'm 32. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So like the Batman cartoon, for example, where when we were kids, we're like, whoa, this is so dark and edgy. You look at it again, it's like, well, this did sort of push the boundaries for what it was. Like, that's cool.
Right.
It's cool that it did that.
Yeah, like I never watched like He-Man or She-Ra when I was a kid, but it's on Netflix, so my son watches it. And like I said, he's 3, but like it explores these kind of weird relationships of like brother and sister, and then like like matriarchs and like all this weird kind of stuff that I don't want to say kids don't understand it, but it's definitely there's some messages outside of just I have a sword and I need to kill the bad guy.
I suppose it's interesting. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it's interesting because it's not as if kids don't understand it. It's just that they aren't that bothered about exploring it, right? But if it wasn't there, they would probably notice it by its absence. If something, an adventure which doesn't have that in, becomes Candyland. So it's good that it's present, but it doesn't need to be explored any further than it being present. Maybe if an adult comes to the same game, they will explore it some more, and that's cool. But it doesn't have to be the focus of the game that you want to make, because you're making the game for a younger audience.
Yeah, sure. And I think that mirrors life, right? Like we have these kind of experiences, and those experiences are ever present. But you're not like walking around telling everyone like, oh, hey, when I was 17, I had an abortion. Like you just don't, you don't. It doesn't need to be in everyone's faces, but it's definitely a part of who you are, and it definitely like shadows some of the decisions you make. So, but anyways, so what's your thoughts and like how we move forward with an idea like this?
So it sounds like we're making. You're saying it could be Dungeon World-esque, but it also sounds like there's stuff that could be quite mechanically distinct in its own right. Like, how far do you want to go from Dungeon World? Do you want to start with something that's brand new? Do you want to?
No, I think Dungeon World at least has a core. And maybe if not, it sounds like you've been exploring like some new mechanics that you've been working on.
I have, and actually they might be really useful for this. Have you ever played World of Dungeons? Did you say you played a bit of World of Dungeons? So the thing I've been exploring with World of Dungeons, right, is turning the dice mechanic on its head a little bit.
Okay.
And making it simple, making it simpler, because doesn't matter if you're 8 years old or 80 years old, like simplicity at the table is good. When you're looking to see what do I need to do the thing, it's nice to be able to see that as quickly as possible. So here's what I've been doing with my little playtest group. It's basically World of Dungeons, but your stat isn't a +1 or a +2 or a -1. It's 6+, 7+, or 8+, right? So you turn it on its head. It's like your dice dictates that. So it becomes a little bit binary again, but a 10+ flat is always a critical. So what happens is, like, exactly, if you roll a 10+, no matter what you're doing, a 10+ is always good. And if you're doing something else, if you're doing strength, I've brought the skills down as well. I only went with strength, dexterity, charisma, and intelligence, I think, because I was thinking, well, in World of Dungeons, where you're like these kind of desperate freebooters, like Constitution, well, you're all going to be sickly because you're all on the poverty line, and you're probably not very wise, else you wouldn't be here in the first place. Right? Like, that's the sort of games I was toying with playing, and the cyberpunk things doing that as well. So like I took out wisdom, and I took out Constitution, and I just added hit points and hit dice from World of Dungeons instead. So I had the dice roll. So it's always like, right, 6+, 7+, 8+, 6+ on your sheet. Those are your 4 stats. When you need to do a thing, roll it. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. If you get a 10+, you're going to get that plus something else, or you're going to mitigate something else. You're going to minimize something else down the line. If someone helps you, then the 10+ becomes a 9+. So you still have to roll something to succeed, but your chances of getting a critical are improved with help.
Cool.
So that's the raw mechanic that I was playing with, which is my sort of Dungeon World light type thing that I've been toying around with recently. And that could, what do you think? Do you think that could work with your guys?
Yeah, I think so. And I like that and as I just philosophically, I don't like that we have intelligence and wisdom. So I'm glad that you like consolidated that into one, because what is the difference between, really, what is the difference between the two? I mean, that definitely feels like an old like holdover from like old D&D. Yeah. I think what I'd like to see in this system for my kiddos is instead of kind of more of like a like with PBTA, instead of having hit points, just having like you have 3 hits, right? And it doesn't matter, like, because then that mitigates one more dice roll. And if they're like, if I just want to like care about the story, I don't need to know that this thing hit you for 4 or 6, or like we get to take away that stage. It's just you took 1 hit. Yeah. And so just to simplify that, but yeah, I think that system sounds really good. I'd love to see that in play. Can you explain a little bit more again about like so you have like your 4 stats.
Let's use the Dungeon World mentality. Let's say you've got strength, dex, int. Those being your 3 offensive stats in Dungeon World anyway, right? So strength, fighter, rogue, and wizard. Your 3 kind of offensive characters there. Strength, dex, and intellect. And then charisma. I took this from Chris McDowell reading. I don't know if you've read Into the Odd at all. Again, very lightweight. It's not story game. It's more OSRE, but it's super lightweight, and I like it a lot. I got a lot of time for that. He's been playing around with renaming charisma as charm, right? It's not so much raw charisma. It's about how charming you can be. I think there's something more in that word charm that I really like. There's elements of diplomacy, to be sure. But and it's also a simpler word. Again, like whether you're young or old, you can zoom in on what that word means much faster.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So those being the 4 stats there. Let's say strength. So we've got strength, dexterity, intellect, intelligence, whatever, and charm. Those being your 4. You could argue those being your 4 main methods of attack. Your 4 main weapons of dealing with a situation. You've got a door in front of you. You've got a guard and a door. You can punch the guard and the door. You can cast a spell at them. You can remember a better route. That's sort of your spouting law type thing, perhaps. You can sneak past the guy and pick the lock, or you can talk the guy into opening the door for you. So you've got your means, your Skyrim-esque means of getting past there. What do they call it in Skyrim? Combat, diplomacy, or stealth. Those are like your 3 core things you could do. Yeah.
But tell me a little bit more about the 6 plus 7 plus, like mechanically, explain that again to me.
Sure. So if you had the a 7 plus is the equivalent of 0 in a stat.
Okay.
7 because the 7 to 9 is what you would need normally. So a 7 plus is the equivalent of a plus 0 in a stat, i.e. an average stat.
Gotcha.
So 8 plus is slightly worse than that. It's technically is a -1. 6 plus fundamentally is the same as +1, and you might go a bit further. You might go 5 plus to a +2, and like so that might be something that you don't initially get, but in play once you level up a little bit, it's 8.
I totally got. Yeah, okay. So and you're still rolling the 2d6.
Still rolling 2 dice. Okay. Yep, and adding them together. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, but I do like that because it just here's the number if you want to be successful with doing it. Like look on your number. Okay, so just roll that number. Yeah. Okay,
strength 6, roll over that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds great.
So then at the very least, it's from a GMing standpoint, it's like, oh cool, you did it. And then if they haven't rolled a 10, then you can say, okay, you did it, but this happens. And obviously this flies a little bit what I was saying earlier about the 10 plus being a malign thing. I've kept it in after all. But there is something in there, isn't there, of keeping like, you've done this and then some. One thing I toyed with, which I've played with it most with Sky Cutters, but it could be in anything, is like talking about the stakes before any rolls are made. If you've played Blades in the Dark, we do that a lot, where you're saying, okay, well, look, it's a risky thing. So the best possible situation you're going to get, whether you roll a 1 or a 10, is going to be this thing. Like this is the GM's going to tell you outright what your best case scenario and your worst case scenario is going to be, and then we talk about that after the fact.
Cool.
I find that. Can I jump in actually? Like, I'm talking loads at the moment. But what sort of encounters do you think would be happening in this? Do you think they'd be fighty? Do you think they'd be talky?
So one of the things I try to hit with my children, my oldest son Atlas, anytime we play Dungeon World, his response is typically punch the bad guy. So, but what I try to do is highlight ways to get through a scene without ever having to punch, because I mean, his first and foremost, I mean, he's a little Power Ranger kid like that. His answer is always
this the same kid who's playing Skyrim?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
and he's 3.
Oh, that's brilliant. No, I love it. It's great.
Well, yeah, and that could be a different conversation, but he's all about action. He's all about story. He's all about like the excitement. So I always try to pose these situations where it's like, we don't have to only just punch guys. So I like the idea that scenes are more predicated on not clearly defined. Here is the bad guy. You have to punch to get through it. Like what you're saying, where there's a guard in front of a door. And maybe this is more of a GM style for me, but I need to highlight that there are other ways to get around it. Yeah. So, but like, I'm more into situations where there is just a problem. So like, let's say it's and again, this is my own GM style, but like there's a bridge on the other side. There's like a dude shooting you, but the bridge is down. What are you going to do? Like, I don't need to, as a GM, even give any mental energy towards what possibilities will work. I just need you to try something and it will either work or not. Right. So someone can say, I'll try to fix the bridge real quick. I'll shoot an arrow with a rope and swing across, or, X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter what the players want to come up with. There's just always the chance for success. And I don't ever want to be in a position where I've already pre-subscribed an answer, because then that always puts me in a position of like, well, actually, the only way to get across was to fix the bridge, So I like kind of more situational problems, and that really don't have any answers, but just like interesting problems to try to get over. So
yeah. I mean, that figures in a lot. I've had more success with those sort of broader, sometimes broader the better situations, and rather than the specifics. I mean, taken to an extreme, and I don't think I've ever done, I hope I've never done this in a book, but if you had to get through that door to proceed, it's not a good adventure. It's a problem, because there's always the possibility, there's always the possibility that they will fail all their rolls and will not get through that door.
Right.
But even worse, they will see that.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're 3 or doesn't matter if you're 300, you will see that in advance. It's like, well, you're telling me I need to get through that door, but what if I don't? So you've already short-circuited yourself. And besides which, if they have to get through the door to proceed, just get them through the door and then deal with the interesting.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I feel is like. That's the problem with like trad games. Is like success is predicated on a dice roll, right? And it's it's like this door is locked. You have to get through it. And then there's always that point that everyone in a trad game has gotten to where they're like, okay, I try to unlock the door, I fail.
Now
can I just try again? And the DM's like, yeah, okay.
Exactly. So why don't you just open it in the first place?
It's not interesting or dangerous, right?
Yeah. So in Dungeon World, that sometimes gets mitigated without getting removed sometimes. So if a trad gamer comes to Dungeon World, what tends to happen, and non-trad as well, like I'm not tarring any brushes here, because like we don't all of us have GM juices which might run out in the middle of an encounter, right? So sometimes, oops, we put the door in, right? And in Dungeon World, the expectation is, okay, I want to try and get through that door by shooting the guy, picking the lock, whatever. And I roll that 6-. First of all, it's like, okay, you fail. And then it is the GM's job. It's in the rules. It's a GM rule to say how the situation changes so they cannot do that again.
Yeah, you know what I find interesting about Dungeon World is instances that are specific like that. Instead of me, I always try to predicate a 6 as not a failure. It's always something else happens. So I might say, I might say before you can even try, a guard comes out or a guard comes around the corner. So I don't even say like, I try to not even like say fail, because then that opens up the door that once they dealt with this guy, then they can just try the door again without it feeling like you get to try the failed thing. Right. It's always in like how you phrase it. But I always try to say like something else happens.
You could end up with a situation which feels quite complex, but potentially isn't, where you're simply listing the complications between players getting from A to B. So you're listing the complications. It's like, sure, I get that you want to get across this moat and up into the tower. The complications from you simply walking up there are, 1, it's a moat, so how are you going to cross the moat? 2, there's a locked door. 3, there's guards in the courtyard. And 4, there's a curse on the tower. So what do you guys want to do about all those? And then that being a very broad situation that they can then zoom into or out of. I found really it's difficult there's, especially if it's a dungeon crawler, there's a big bit of inertia to think like, oh, hang on, we don't want this to rush through. We don't want to run out of information. But actually that never happens, because you simply, once you get to the tower, you then carry on and say, okay, cool. So what are you guys doing next? What's your exit strategy? You got to do all that in reverse now. How does that play out? You can just keep going.
Right.
Again, Blades, this is why Blades is a big part of what's going on in my makeup at the moment, because Blades does this cool thing where you're transitioning from mission to downtime. And it's a pretty soft transition in terms of how it's framed in the book. Sometimes downtime will escalate up into an action of some kind, and sometimes a mission will complete and then just kind of filter away into sort of downtimey role play type actions. And then there might be scenes in between which don't quite fit, and that's okay. That's really nice. It's nice to have these quite discrete. It comes back to that idea you were saying earlier about like bonds, and how there's sort of a rule that one needs to hold softly. And it's not really said in the book that you hold them softly, because after all, on everyone's character sheet. Whereas here, it's pretty explicit to say, okay, well, look, this is the general format of like, there's going to be elements of downtime and elements of mission play and elements in between. And it's okay what order those go in. And that feels really great. You get a really great flow. It helps to maintain the flow of a game really well. I could see that working in here. You could have a larger or smaller scale of, if the final thing's to return to the library, then that's the final bit, isn't it? You've got the element of the approach to the library being a story in itself. Or if it was a smaller scale thing, you might have multiple returns to the library functioning like downtime. An opportunity of them using the time to take books out. Maybe they take another book out. Maybe there's more than one book, and different books are required for different goals. Maybe there's some sort of random element in there, and you do some nice table rolling in advance or something like that. Again, just to get the motor, like the GM would just do a little bit of random generation at the start to say, okay, so these pages go with these books and these pages go with these books. Maybe that's something you would do in front of the players to say, okay, look, we've got some books out in the library on roles table of elemental things, fire, water, and time. Okay, cool. So which book do you want to look at first? And then it's up to the GM to start making like a load of fire-based Pokemon pages, for want of a better term, or time-based ones or whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Cool. So moving forward, what do you, I guess, what do you foresee how this timeline on the project? What do we need to do next? Expectations for me with contributions as far as like ideas, like what do we do next? What's the next stage?
In terms of your contributions, the more the merrier. Like I'm happy for this to have your stamp on it. And I would in fact prefer it. It's nice to have some further feedback. I think it's, we can work on it together and have something more concrete rather than me going away and doing a thing that I think fits the bill. So I definitely want us to kind of liaise on the system as it is and continue to kind of refine that. In terms of going ahead, I mean, I'm pretty flexible. I can work to your schedule. If this is something you want to crack on with because there's a birthday coming up or something, then we can do that. But if there isn't any particular schedule, that's fine too. We just crack on as and when we have times and schedules that meet. Okay. So what do you think? Is there specific timeframes?
There is a birthday that's coming up, but there's just no way that we'd get it done. It's my son's birthday is later on this month, but yeah, I mean, there's just no way.
So it would be quite nice for us to be in a position where we're iterating something. So maybe there's something you could bring in its early form that he can play on or around, and he might be playing a play test before and a play test after, say, like a little one to say, okay, manage your expectations, guys, because we're just doing a little thing. Let's see how it plays out. And then you can feed that back and see how it played, and then we can do another one after his birthday and see how he gets on with it after that.
Yeah, cool. One thing I'm really I would like to see, and I don't know how realistic it is, but like I said, there'd be the two main characters, which are the sons. But like,
did you say? Sorry to jump in. Did you say Atlas and Cassio? Was it? Or
yeah.
Cassio,
Let me. I'll spell it for you in chat here.
Go for it.
Wherever chat is.
Use the Hangouts chat if you like. Use this one. That one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just sent
that. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I'll use that.
Okay.
Oh, you've got a group chat in here still. Oh, that's cool. Oh, Hangouts on air still works like old Hangouts. That's useful.
Yeah. The only thing that they changed was you have to go through YouTube, and then it's a bit harder to record.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but it's nice because then it just uploads it straight to YouTube. And what I'll do is after we're done here, I'll give you the address. So I know
the unlisted one.
Yeah, I know that you're probably taking notes or whatever, but this way you just have the audio.
That'd be brilliant.
Or whatever. Cool. But is it possible that just like I said with Lady Blackbird, that there be like very like simple kind of like these are the 4 characters that you're gonna play, and it's basically 2 kids and a mom and a dad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so for my own character, I wanted it to be like a wizard. And then for my wife, she wanted to be like kind of like more like a dryad kind of druid. Maybe not like shape shifting, but she was more of like blending in.
Is this why your face turned down when I started maligning the druids?
No. But I will say, it's a little off topic. My issues with Dungeon World is I definitely had an issue with when we deal with the shape shifting, because the only thing anyone ever turns into is something that flies or a dragon. I swear, in my games. And it's like, okay, here's a problem. Here's a bridge. The bridge is broken. Someone's like, I'm just going to turn into a bird and carry a rope over. And that's the answer.
There's no reason to do anything else, right? Like the druid I was telling you about in the example, he got really into character and character creation. He's like, oh yeah, I'm this kind of barbarian type guy. And we used to kind of cross the northern plains, and we did this and that. And we used to hunt, like we had aurochs and buffalo that were like, they were our herds, and they were like our spirit animals and stuff. And then like the first session, he's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I turned into a giant aurochs. I'm like, yeah, cool. You trample the guys. And he's like, okay, what does that do? And it's like, well, you trampled them. You trampled the crap out of them. It's like, okay, cool. Couldn't I just done damage roll? It's well, well, sort of, but you've only got D6 damage, so this is better. It's like, oh right, okay. Then like the very next one, he's like, oh, I turn into a vulture and fly off. Like, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
From there, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And then the other one I don't like is the ranger. Their pet. If you do it the way it's written without doing like Jason Lutz as updated ranger, it is miserable to try to upkeep all that. Ugh, yuck. Yeah, it's not written very well.
And Jason Lutz's one is really nice. We had my fiance was playing as the ranger, and we had loads of fun. Second only to the NPC I was telling you about. Actually, she's back now. I'm going to ask her. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
1 sec. Ames. There was Terok. That was
nice.
it. Terok the NPC. He was like a bird style guy, come crap thief, who could sort of fly, but immediately it's like, no, he can't properly fly. Wings are stunted. No, none of that. And then so second only to Terok in like the PC's estimation was the other hireling, which was the ranger's pet, who was basically the dog from Up.
Oh, nice.
And it was like, we love this dog. And every time the dog was vaguely at threat, it's like, no, you can't kill the dog. You can't do that. Which is exactly what you want to happen.
Right. Yeah. And that system of just having the pet they're basically just a follower or a hireling at that point. So yeah, that's way better than trying to do like all the stat differences that like the original play. Ugh, it's miserable.
Which comes back to the idea of like the 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus. Like if you're looking at a stat, and the idea is that, okay, you might get +1. You could minimize the +1-age and -1-age, which Dungeon Mod does try and do. It does say don't add +1s and -1s for the stuff, but it has like the forward thing. So like having the score in front of you and that being like pretty much stone, like set in stone, that doesn't change. That's so much less cognitive load for the players. It's brilliant, and it doesn't matter if you're 3 or 33.
Right. And it's mechanically the same, right? Like, it's like you kind of need the same number.
No, I think so. I think it's exactly the same, except for the 10 plus differentiation.
Right. It's presented in a way that you don't have to then do the math. So it's cutting it all out. Yeah.
The two differences I think are you don't do the math, and the 10 plus there's always the same chance for 10 plus, which incidentally is the same as rolling a 6 on a single dice. It's about 16%. So I worked out the math when I was playing around with this thing. So it turns out a 10 plus is like a 16% chance on 2 dice, which is of course the same as a 6 or a single result on any single die. So that's interesting. So you've always got a 1 in 6 chance of critting anyway, and that doesn't become silly because like you get your +2s and your +3s, and they'll never do anything else ever again. So by keeping it quite limited, but also increasing the stakes. So 10 pluses traditionally are like, you get what you want and nothing happens, which means that after they can either zoom forward and get get a +3 in a stat after a few games, and suddenly they're never going to lose any ever again.
Right.
Or not. Yeah, it's not
Cool.
ideal.
All right.
Right.
So moving forward, I guess would it be beneficial for you if like I just kind of did like a quick write up of I don't know, like my son, I know. I'm sorry.
Can you throw some ideas into Google Docs? Maybe is that something that you can use?
Yeah. That sounds good.
Have you got a name in mind for the project as a whole, like the name of the book, or?
I don't have one. And I asked my son earlier because he's like always into these creative kind of things. Like, what should the name of the land be? And I don't think he gave me a name. But I'll be working on that with him. But yeah, I have no idea for the for the project yet.
No problem. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a Google Doc up now.
Okay.
All my stuff starts in Google. I mean, that is a part of my flow that I do. Is everything starts in Google Docs and then kind of switches back and forth from InDesign to Google Docs as I'm working on it. I'm going to paste in the notes I've got so far. Is there an email address that's good for sharing with?
Yeah, it's just my name here. I'll give it to you right here. Andrew James.
Or is it the?
Yeah, that's just my name.
Oh, it's the Gmail one from before, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll get that shared with you now. So, yeah, that should. I can edit. Yeah, that's it. Done. Okay, so I've shared. It's just a Google Doc.
Okay.
Edit it, play around with it, add more stuff in as you see fit.
Cool.
And we'll use that as a starting point. If we can write something in there, if you want to write ideas in there, and then you can say, okay, over to you. Can you put something together and make this into like a gameable format? That'd be cool. I take on board, and I agree that the Lady Blackbird-esque format is a really strong format for something like this as well, where it's like, I don't want to call it a pseudo game. That's not fair, but it's a micro game. It's a game where, it's very self-contained, and that's a big. I like those sorts of things. If you haven't read it already as well, have a look at John Harper's other things. So Bootleggers, if you haven't read that before, that's a very good one that follows this sort of format. World of Dungeons, of course. And if you haven't read Blades in the Dark, I would recommend reading that, just because it's a good game. There's loads of stuff in there which feels like an evolution of Dungeon World in a lot of respects. But Bootleggers would actually be a very good one to read, because that's World of Dungeons, but in a different angle and tweaking elements of the mechanics to suit. So I think that'd be really useful to have a look at here.
Yeah, and you mentioned World of Dungeons, and I was thinking about the magic mechanic in there, and I guess that would probably fit pretty well too, because it's so loose, where it's like you have your two spirits or whatever, and then whatever those spirits are, then you kind of use to however you want to use them. And that sounds like that would something like that would work really well with whatever the element or whatever the subject of the book is. So if it's time, if it's fire or whatever, I don't think it needs to be so mechanized where it's like, when you get this, it does 2d6 damage or whatever. It could just be fire.
Yeah, it applies, this is a fire spirit. It applies the fire tag to anything it does. Right. Yeah. So if you want to start a fire, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. But if you want to blast through some wood, well, sure, you're blasting, but you're applying the fire tag. So if there's any other wood nearby, it's probably going to set on fire. Something of that kind of ilk. I found out when I think it's in Begging in Paradise, actually, the little kind of Dungeon Worldy light thing that I wrote at the start of that. I added in the Quicksilver, isn't it, that he uses? Yeah. But I found that one real easy fix was to simply name the demons you start with, or the spirits or whatever. Like, you start by because I think in World of Dungeons and Written it says, like, you start with the ability to conjure 2 spirits and one ritual, but it doesn't say what they are, which doesn't give you much to go on. But by saying it's like, Baphomet, who is a demon of fire and time, and Abraxas, who is a demon of ice and I don't know, whatever. Like that's your kicking off point right there. Yeah, you could even preface it by saying, if you don't like these, ask the GM. I'm sure it's fine. Right? Because it doesn't matter. You pick them out of a hat, and it's not a big deal, is it?
Right. On G Plus, I just put a post asking people what their favorite magic systems were. Yeah, and I think the overwhelming answer that I'm getting on that is not that I'm doing this for other people, but the overwhelming answer I get is that people really like that free form of like have an evocative name, and then it's up to you to figure out how to even make it make sense. Because then that puts it puts the magic back in magic, right? Like when you know a spell does 1d4 plus 1 force damage, and it automatically hit like a magic missile. It's like it does the same thing every time. There's really no magic in that. So I like the.
There's a really interesting, there's a really interesting. It comes up from time to time because the whole OSR community, Maze Rats is another one, the Black Hack, various hacks like the Indie Hack as well, and Into the Odd. They're all OSR mentality, which I'm only vaguely, I don't really get it because I don't really get where it's come from because I haven't played those games, but I get where it's going. And the idea is that rather than say, okay, yes, you have a sword of +1 stabbing, it will, whenever you stab a guy, it'll give you +1. Instead of those tools, it gives you much more open-ended tools, which could be potentially incredibly powerful, but you need to know how to best leverage them in order to make them work for you. So it's like, I don't know, the bag of exploding. It's infinite, but it will probably explode every time you open it. But it's infinite. So how do you best use that? Like, it's only going to be a matter of time before someone uses that as a grenade. And it's like, oh, I didn't expect that. So I think that's a really, I like that as well. I like the idea of spells are a good fallback for those sorts of things. Sometimes you use magic items. Sometimes it's just quite wide-ranging skills. But spells are the traditional one, right? Where you can be like, right, let's get these D100 tables and be like, right, Ezerim's floating sandcastle. Okay, I didn't expect that. Okay, how are you going to use that, guys?
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I look forward to working in the future with you on this. I have another interview with Ray Otis right now.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. So moving forward, I'll look into that Google Doc and kind of just put some general notes.
Yes.
But do you think moving forward, what's the best way for us to communicate?
I'm happy for us to meet for Hangouts. I can do Thursdays or Fridays. A little bit of wiggle room because I've also got that Blades game, which is also in the US. So I've got to wiggle around a little bit with that. But that notwithstanding, I would like for us to meet and chat to see how we're getting on with the doc on a sort of roughly weekly basis. It doesn't matter if it's bi-weekly or whatever, but like something so we can keep our interests up and just keep this ticking over and keep it quite vibrant. Until we're at a position where it's looking pretty complete.
Okay.
I think, it'll be a few weeks till we get to that stage, and then we'll probably be looking and going, okay, this is probably ready to present. Around that stage, I'll probably be thinking, right, I want to get this into InDesign and start putting some work into this and make it into something that's closer to a finished product.
Do you? How do you? What's your process with like artwork? Because like all your like even just something like Beggars and Parrot, like how are you getting? Because you're not like. That's not your artwork per se, right?
No.
Yeah, okay.
It's all off of the Flickr Creative Commons. It's actually not Creative Commons even. It's actually public domain. The British Library uploaded all of their old artwork. Like they scanned in all of their old books and they added them to Flickr. They did it years ago, and it's like a little hidden gem. People do tend to know. John Stone's used it quite a bit. I think Jason used it a little bit as well. It's a really, really useful resource. So I use a little bit of extra work in Illustrator to render those images down into like silhouettes or just kind of minimize them a little bit. And then I use that as my textures and my images. You've got to do... It's tricky because sod's law, you search for skull and you find everything that isn't a skull, right? Like you've got to do a little bit of looking around, a little bit of work, but like when it does work, it's so useful. I make my own maps when they're relevant. They haven't been that relevant all the time, but if you've got your own setting, it might be useful to put a few pins in, draw maps, leave blanks, sort of thing. And then I've used a little bit of artwork in the past. Vandal J. Arden, who did the last Codex. He did the cover for Codex Crystal that just came out. I really like Vandal's work. I know he's had a lot of difficulty in his personal life in the last few years, but like his artwork is top notch. I really like Vandal stuff. So like if it's relevant, I'll commission a cover or two. But generally speaking, yeah, I just use Flickr. Cool.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So
any other question you throw over to me as well. Like if there's anything you're not sure about, just email me. Email me is the best way of conversation. I'll get back to you as soon as I can on that. probably not Hangouts, because Hangouts can be like the odd message can get missed. I don't stay on Hangouts all the time. You can also plus me over Google Plus, and I'll see that usually on a daily basis. So either of those is fine, and we'll make a rough plan to meet up in a week or so and see where we're at.
Yeah, I think this time might work out. We'll be in touch. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
so
sounds good.
Man. Well, thanks again for doing the podcast, and I'm gonna edit that, and then I'll shoot it over to you so you can listen. But it'll be probably within a week or so.
Awesome. I look forward to it. We really look forward to it.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, and good luck with Ray. You'll have a blast of that.
Awesome.
That's great.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers, man. Bye.